Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. It's a pretty wet day here in England, but happy Friday to everybody. We're just going to pick up right away. Today we are going to be looking at dynamic content inside of Gatsby.js. And by dynamic content, I mean content that's fetched or retrieved at runtime rather than at build time, which Gatsby is most famous for. So as we all know, Gatsby offers a number of APIs for us developers to query data at build time, whether that's in their create pages API or using a page query or a static query. They use static query hook. So they have a number of ways to retrieve data at build time to build static pages. However, they don't offer any APIs to do that at build time. At runtime. So that's kind of fetching data dynamically on page load. And instances that you'd want to do that would be more data that's more often likely to change. So things like product inventory in a commerce world, or perhaps in this particular instance that we're looking at today, blog comments. So we're just going to kind of quickly look at something I've been working on recently. And this is a new Gatsby Starter that's powered by GraphCMS. It's kind of your traditional starter. It's a blog, not exactly an original idea, but a very common use case for headless CMSs. So we have this whole idea of posts, authors here. And this is a pretty nice little starter that we've got going on. We've got some pagination there. And this is all powered by GraphCMS at build time, Gatsby build time, and Tailwind CSS. So what we're going to want to do is, like I said, this is using the build time APIs for data fetching. So these pages are all static HTML. But we're going to look today at, am I on the right? Yeah, I'm just making sure I'm on the right scene here because I'm kind of walking through this this demo. So yeah, what we're going to look at today is actually getting runtime data into this Gatsby Starter. And we're going to do that using Apollo Client 3, which has recently been released. So we're going to add Apollo Client to our Gatsby app, retrieve some data from GraphCMS. So let's get started. Alright, so first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to, we're going to create a new project in GraphCMS using the blog starter here. So go ahead and click that. And I'm just going to give this a name that's appropriate. Gatsby Starter comments, that's fine. We'll create that in Europe. Yes, we want the template content. So when that's checked, that means basically we're going to get the blog posts, the blog authors, the actual content, as well as the schema will be created in our project. I'm going to create that now. That should start firing off. And we're just going to run this on our very generous developer plan here, which should be more than enough to power a blog. So whilst that's cloning there, we will look at our starter. So this is a new starter that I've been working on recently. It's powered by the new Gatsby source plugin as well. Like I said, it's going to build, it's going to query for data from GraphCMS and build us some static blog posts, pages, and things like that. Some nice features here. It's using Gatsby image for the images, so we get the kind of local assets that are fetched at build time and then rendered in our static application. Get the nice lazy load in there without having to do a network request. We've got MDX support as well with Gatsby plugin MDX. So that means in our GraphCMS schema with a rich text field, we can essentially invoke React components. Pretty cool. And as I said, it's using Tailwind CSS, which we love here at GraphCMS, and I love as well. So our project is created. We're prompted to invite some team members right now. We're just going to skip this step because I'm just riding solo in this stream. So we're right here in our project dashboard. So what we're going to do is we're just going to look at our schema. So because we cloned from a GraphCMS template, we already have a predefined schema with some models for us. So obviously we have common blog post things like a post model, an author model, and also a page, an SEO model. We're not going to focus on those as much. We're going to look mostly at this post model. So this post model essentially defines the scheme by which we create and query our blog posts, title, slug, the date of the blog post, an excerpt. These are all well described as well if you're using this template. Yeah, but what we're going to do is we're going to actually extend this schema to add a new model, and that model is going to be comments, so that we can then essentially add some comments to our blog post pages inside of our Gatsby app. So I'm going to add a new model here, and we're going to call that comment. It's always best when you're defining the model to use a singular name. You notice I didn't pluralize it, but it will be pluralized inside of the schema for queries and types and the like. We're going to create that model, and then we're going to add some fields to this that will essentially define what our comments look like and what the shape of that data is. So I'm going to add an email address. So this will be an email address of the comment author. And what we'll do is we'll actually use the new validations. We'll make this required. We'll match a specific pattern. So we're looking at basically using a regex here to match emails. This is a predefined option for us. So we can just go ahead and check that. There's the regex there. Very complicated regex. I've always grappled with regex, but I'm just going to go ahead and use that. So you can obviously edit that if you need be. Doesn't need to be unique. Is required. It should be everything. Yeah, nice. All right, so we got ourselves an email field. And what we will also add is a, what do we want? Let's go ahead and just make this, let's do rich text. So this is the actual comment. So this will be called the content on the comment view. And we're going to, again, we need this to be required because what's a comment without the actual comment? So that's required. Let's go ahead and create that there. Obviously I could add a whole bunch of other things to this. Perhaps we want a name. This could be an optional field for the author of the comment. Yes, we'll not make that required. We'll create that as well. All right, so we've got our comment model here. Now what we actually need to do is actually connect that to the pre-existing post model to ensure that those comments when created actually belong to a post. So if we go into our post model, down the right here in the field section, we'll just scroll down to the reference relation here, so define a content relationship. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to say this post can have comments. And then we need to actually select the model by which this field will be represented by and what it will reference. So in this case, we only need a single model, although we can allow multiples using union types, but we just need a single one in this instance, so it's comment. And of course, a post can have multiple comments, so we have to allow for multiple values to that. And what happens is when we click this, we're going to actually then create the reverse field, so that'll be the field on the comment model which will relate to the post. So that means that on the comment it'll have a relationship to its parent post, and on the post we'll have a relationship to the child comments as well. So this, so as you said, the relationships are bidirectional, so there's always a reverse field created, and that means we can kind of, if we wanted to query for a specific comment, we can also get the post that it belongs to. So this comment can only ever belong to one post, so we don't want to check that there, and we're just going to leave that as is because it's obviously a singular instance. So create that. So that's going to go ahead and now update our schema there. So you'll notice on our posting we now have a new comments field, which is a reference to obviously comment, and in comment we have the post reference to a singular post. Excellent. We're just going to quickly throw in some comments here quickly. As you can see, the validation is working there. Inline email validation. I'm going to put my name here. Now normally we'd be creating these posts in an actual form field on the website, and they would be submitted by a user. We're not going to get to that step today. We will come back to visit that using the GraphCMS mutations API. Today we're just going to do read-only in Gatsby. So we'll just kind of create some comments inside of the CMS that we can then fetch with Apollo client. So there's our email address, we got our name. We're just going to write a comment here. This was a really great read. Thanks for sharing. Now, because it's a rich text field, we can actually do some things like bold and things, italicize, underline, even add a link in and stuff like that. And then inside of Gatsby, we can use the markdown representation of this field to actually render those links so they're clickable. We might come back to that. For the time being, we're just going to leave this as just kind of a text. I'm just going to copy this and create a few comments with the same content. We're just going to select an existing post. So we already have posts when we cloned this template in GraphCMS. We already have posts, so we can just select an existing one. So I'm just going to click this top one here, technical SEO, and that's added the link there, the relationship between the two. So I'm going to go ahead and just check this, and then I can save and create another, and that will create that entry, and then we're back to the creation UI with a blank slate. So we can just do this. I'm just going to add an email from my friend and colleague Jamie. Same content, again, not really important. We'll just do a separate post there, and again, save that. And so if we have a look now at our comments, we have a couple of comments there. If we go into edit here, you can see that relationship exists. What's important to know is that these are currently in draft. So depending on the access token that we will set up in a minute, we might not actually get these comments back from our query, because the access token might be scoped to publish content only or draft content. So we're just going to go ahead and publish these just so we don't trip ourselves up at any point. All right, so we've added some content, we've added some comments, we've extended the schema with a comment model, we've added the relationship between the comment and the post. So now what we can do is we can actually go ahead and we're going to go ahead and fork this project, this starter. Actually, I don't need to fork it right now. Yeah. No, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fork this project, and then I will use the Gatsby CLI on the fork that way. Okay, so let's just fork this here to my personal space. So that should just go ahead and do that now. And whilst we're waiting, we'll just dive into VS Code and we'll start typing. And as you can see, I've already pre-written this here, little cheat code there. So as soon as that's finished, which is done, it's forked now, I should now be able to run this. And the Gatsby new CLI command is essentially going to clone that repository, create a new project for us, initiate a local Git repository, and also do a yarn install, I believe, depending on the project. So it has a yarn lock file, it's going to use yarn, package lock file, use npm. So we'll do that now. And that should take not very long at all. So this is going in here, install now dependencies so that we can essentially go right into the project and get it up and running straight away. But what we need to do first is we actually need to go into our GraphCMS project and get a few values. It's been a long week. A few values so we can actually run this project locally. So obviously we need the endpoint URL, which is what we will query. So I'll just go ahead and copy that. And we also need to set up a permanent auth token so that we can actually query the data. So we're not going to make this available publicly. We're going to create a new token called development, and we're going to return content from the draft stage by default. We'll also make published available, but we'll use default. We'll use draft as default and create that. So that generates a token there. I'm not going to copy that because I've just got the endpoint on my clipboard. So if we go back to VS Code now, as you can see, new Gatsby site is successfully bootstrapped. So now we can dive into the project and actually open up. Right. I'll have to have a new. There we go. Alright. So, as you can see, we've got a bootstrapped Gatsby project here. We've got our node modules. We have a local Git repository. So that's some of the stuff that you get by using the Gatsby CLI. So what we're going to do is we're going to we'll just use the instructions of the repository. So we've done this, we've used the Gatsby CLI, and then we need to provide our project keys. So you can see we need an endpoint and a token. So this repository, this starter, provides a sample env, so we can copy that and then just fill in the blanks. Nice. So we've got our endpoint on the clipboard. I'm just going to go back to GraphCMS quickly, copy that token I just created, and throw that in there as well. So now we should be able to just run this. I'm just going to run this on here. We're running Gatsby develop. This is going to go off, fetch our data, build our blog locally. So we've got a nice fast static blog site. And that will be available at localhost 8000. So once this is done, should be able to refresh this page and pretty much have a clone of the other demo site I was just demonstrating. So it should just be a complete clone of that because we've cloned the code, we've cloned the GraphCMS project template, and we're not actually using the stuff that we've added yet, like the comments. So this is still just building here. What you can see is it's been generating the actual local asset images from the remote source, and that's finished now. So if I refresh this, there we go. We have our blog. Nice. Alright. So that's up and running. That's how quickly you can get up and running with Gatsby and GraphCMS. Pretty cool. But we want to extend this. We've already extended the schema. Now we want to extend the actual code to use that schema. Now with comments, we could fetch these at build time. Obviously that will work. However, the entire nature of that means that more recent comments would be missing unless you kind of find a new build every time your comments you got a new comment. So what we want to do is we actually want to fetch comments dynamically at runtime when you view that page, so we get the latest comments on the blog. So to do that, we need some kind of GraphQL client on our client inside of our Gatsby app to retrieve that data. Now, as I said, you can't do that with Gatsby out of the box, but with Gatsby, essentially it's a React application. And yes, it builds static pages, but they then rehydrate into a React app. So we can use any kind of React tooling we want. In this case, I'm picking Apollo client. There's also things like Urkel. There's obviously GraphQL request, which is a very kind of stripped back client that I'll just got no cache or anything like that. There's also awesome GraphQL client or something like that. That's pretty new. I've seen Jamie using that. So yeah, there's a whole array of options that we can use. Anything that will work with React will work in Gatsby. So we're going to use Apollo client just because it's probably the most synonymous with GraphQL, and also it's got a nice hooks UI for us to actually run queries, and also a pretty powerful caching layer as well. So let's get Apollo client set up. So obviously we need to install Apollo client, create an actual client, and then what we're actually going to end up doing is wrapping our Gatsby app with this Apollo provider, and that will essentially make the Apollo client available throughout our Gatsby app, so then we can actually run queries in the page to get the data we need. So let's get started, and let's install this and get set up inside of Gatsby. So I'm just going to do yarn add Apollo client. Again, the E flag, I just like that because it gives you the exact latest version. Yeah, it's not required. Alright, so that's installed. Nice. So because this isn't a Gatsby plugin, we don't need to add it to Gatsby config. This is something that's going to run at it's going to be used at runtime rather than at build time, so Gatsby doesn't really need to be aware of it. So what we need to do, the next steps, if we remember, are to actually create the client and wrap our React app with this Apollo provider. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now with Gatsby, they actually provide two ways for you to, well, there's two instances of your Gatsby application, and that's you have the client side with Gatsby browser, and obviously Gatsby SSR as well for server side rendered versions of pages as well. So you need to kind of account for both when working in Gatsby. As you can see in my SSR, I'm just re-exporting these APIs from the Gatsby browser file. Essentially they're the same APIs. You might just be doing things differently if you're in server side, and we'll come to that in a second, which will happen with Apollo. What we're going to do is we're actually just going to kind of create an Apollo client. So we'll do const Apollo client equals new Apollo client. It's not giving me the import, which is frustrating. Alright, and inside of here we actually need to provide a few things. So if we look back at the docs here, most basic version of using Apollo client is to pass in a URI, which is our GraphCMS endpoint, and also a cache key, and we can use we're just going to use the new we're going to use the built-in memory cache from Apollo client as well for that. But in our particular case, we need to go a little further. We actually need to pass in tokens or pass in headers to send our token with our request, because we locked our GraphCMS API down. So inside of here, new HTTP. So all right, so there's a few things that we need to account for. So what we'll do is we'll set up the cache, and it's going to be new in memory cache. Okay, and then as well, normally we can just do URI, and then we could read this from our environment variables, which we previously had set up, and you can do GraphCMS endpoint. However, because we need to two things, because we also need to pass headers with our token, and we also need to accommodate or account for the server-side aspect of Gatsby, we actually need to pass an instance of fetch or a fetch client to our Apollo client class. So we can't use this URI key. We have to actually use something called a link and create a new HTTP link. So let's do this now. All right, and then that will take, we'll actually just create this outside of here. We'll actually create this outside of the class. So we're going to declare a new constant. And then inside of here we can do URI. And this will be our GraphCMS endpoint. And as well, we need to pass fetch, because as I said, we need an instance of fetch available to our server side. That doesn't come bundled with Node. It's only a browser API, so you have to kind of polyfill it on Node for our server side instance of Gatsby. And we also need to do headers. So headers is an object, and we're just going to, as I'm pretty sure it's an authorization key for GraphCMS. So this is GraphCMS, what GraphCMS expects in the request headers to authenticate, and it's bearer, and then we use template literals. We can do process env GraphCMS token. Okay, so this should create a new Apollo alright, cool. So this should create a new Apollo client for us that we can then pass to the Apollo provider. However, there's two problems right now. One is pretty obvious, and the other has caught me out before. So we're kind of defined fetch here using this fetch key. However, we haven't imported any fetch library to use on the server side. So we need to go ahead and install a new dependency. So just going to do yarn add isomorphic fetch. So this will give us both a fetch client on the client side and on the server side. I can just do import fetch from iso. I don't know where my IDE's gone. It's not really helping me out right now. Alright. So there's still another issue, and I wonder if anybody's noticed it right now. So this is interesting. So what I'll do is see if anybody kind of comes to this. So this is something that catches people up quite a bit. Yeah, right. So normally, when working in Gatsby, you can just use .env if it comes bundled with Gatsby. You can use .env and then you can just access any environment variables like so. So that's just reading from our .env that we created before. As you can see, just a key value. However, because in here, in this Gatsby browser, we're not in a Gatsby node file, we're not in build time, this is runtime. We actually need those environment variables to be available to us on the client side. And to do that, we have to prefix them with Gatsby. Yeah, so envars which are prefixed with Gatsby will become available in browser in JavaScript. So we need to make some slight amendments to this. So what we'll do is we'll just prefix this. And that means they can still be used at build time with that prefix. That doesn't mean they won't work doesn't mean they won't work at runtime. Just means they will work at client time, runtime. I think I've got everything mixed up there. So just because they've got the prefix, the Gatsby prefix, doesn't mean they won't work at build time. They will still work at build time, but they'll also work at runtime in client-side JavaScript, which is what we need here. So again, just going to prefix these. Oh, I escaped too quickly. Nice. All right, so we built our Apollo client here, our Apollo client const, but obviously it's unused right now, which is what Gatsby ESLint is warning us about. So what we need to do is actually wrap our root element, our Gatsby element, our Gatsby site. We need to wrap that element with the Apollo provider. So we can do this, and my IDE is back. Get an auto import there, and I'm just gonna. An Apollo provider has one prop, I believe. Client, not children. Where's my keys? And we pass it our new instantiate Apollo client there. Nice. So in theory, we should now have Apollo up and running. We can test that theory. Not on that browser. Not there either. We can test that theory here. DevTools. Just go into Apollo. So yeah, so you can see we've got a Graphql here, which is essentially a way for us to query our schema of GraphCMS, and we're getting an error. And I think I might need to rebuild the project. So let me just try that. I'm just going to also double check the signature for that Apollo HTTP link. Where are you? Here we go. I can't find the docs now. I literally cannot find the docs. Let me just try this again now we've rebuilt. Alright, there. So I just need to rebuild Gatsby. So yeah, so we're just querying for our posts. Just have that data. Rerun that. Yeah. So as you can see, this is dynamic data. Essentially, that query's just been run now, as opposed to the query that was run to build this page was done at build time. So you can see we're getting all our posts back here. And what you'll notice is we now have a new comments field there which you can run, and when a post has comments, they're available to us there. That's pretty awesome. So now we've got Apollo up and running inside of Gatsby. We actually need to go and make that request that I just did in the Apollo DevTools actually on the page. So we want to, essentially what we're trying to achieve is to run or add these comments down at the bottom here, this page. Just make this a bit wider actually. Yeah, so we want these comments to appear at the bottom here. So this is a template. Blog post template. And yeah, so you can see there's some Gatsby page queries here, which are essentially fetching the assets using the sharp fragments, so we can use Gatsby image and things like that. It's pretty nice. But what we want to do is we want to add some dynamic or runtime queries now to this page, so we can actually get this data to us, essentially. Get the data, get the comments for this post that we're on. All right, cool. So how do we do that? Let's have a quick look at the Apollo docs. So as I said before, Apollo Client 3, I believe it was Apollo Client 3, introduced hooks. Might have been before this actually. I think it was before this. But anyway, React hooks, use query hook with Apollo, very nice. You pass it a function and it returns 3 variables that you can use: data, load and error. And obviously you can determine just UI state dependent on the values of those, and they update through the lifecycle of the request. So it's pretty straightforward to use. We just need to write a query, and the query is going to be based on the GraphCMS schema, not the Gatsby GraphCMS schema. So by that I mean, because we're using the source plugin, let me just quickly demonstrate this. So because we're using Gatsby the Gatsby source GraphCMS, you'll notice that all of our models or our schemas in GraphCMS are now prefixed with this all GraphCMS comment thing, for example. So this is how Gatsby builds the schema using the source plugin. So where I'm going to write the query like that, normally you'd write the query like this. Yeah, right. So what we're actually going to do is our Apollo query is actually going to mimic the regular GraphCMS schema, which is more like this. Yeah, so that's what roughly our schema is going to look, something like this. Obviously we only need a single post and its comments, or what we can actually do is actually say comments where post ID and then we can use our post variable there, our post ID variable, which should be available on the Gatsby page for us. We can pass that to the query and so on. So let's start writing up a query. So firstly we're going to import use query from Apollo client, and then we'll define our, I've not worked with variables actually. This might be interesting. Let's have a look. I'm so used to working with Gatsby on Next.js and their kind of data fetching hooks and APIs that I've not used Apollo for a while. Okay, so there we go. So use query accepts an options object with variables in. All right, cool. That's nice. So that should be pretty good for us. So let's go ahead and write our comments query that we can then pass to use query here. So we need to do const comments query equals GQL. Should import that from Apollo client. I don't think you can use the GraphQL tag from Gatsby. I think you need to use the GQL tag from Apollo. Not sure why that is. Let's just go comments. So actually I need to start this again. I need to say comments query post comments query. We need to define a variable, so it's going to be ID. I think it'll be ID. And then inside of here we can do comments where post ID is ID variable. Cool. And then inside of this, outside of that, we obviously want the email. No, we want the content. We're just going to get the text back for now, because that's a rich text field. It's a nested field. We just want the text back. We also want the email and the name of our comment author. Just going to indent this. All right. So what we actually have to do is, of course, is we need to pass. No, we do that inside the use query. So again, we get use query here, and then we can pass our comments query, and then in here we can do variables, and then it will be ID equals page dot remote. Remote ID, I think, because the Gatsby source plugin does this prefix for ID, so it should be remote ID. Then of course return data, error loading. All right. Indentation of these GraphQL tags always just looks weird to me. Alright, so we've got a query that should run now. Let me just check this. Actually want to log this just to make sure that this is defined. Alright. Expected found name ID. So obviously something wrong with my query here. What does this look like? Where post ID? What is this missing? What is it missing? This is going to be so obvious. GraphQL syntax error expected, $X found name ID. I'm just... So let's just try this without the variable to start. So I think I missed something off here. So let's just get all the comments to start. All right, yeah, so this worked. So there's obviously something wrong with my query that I'm going to kick myself. So yeah, you can see our data here is now defined. We've got 2 comments, the ones that we created. That's accessible to us now in our Gatsby page to do as we want. But obviously, both those comments don't belong to this specific post, which is why I needed to pass that variable in. So I'm just going to log, I think that's why. I think page remote ID is undefined. Yes, so I need to add that to our page query in Gatsby node. I need to add a remote ID. So that's why the query is erroring. Yes, Gatsby, please rebuild. I've added it to the pages query. I don't know the pages query. I want it on posts. Remote ID. Alright, we're just going to rebuild this. So now I'll go back to my blog post template, and we should have remote ID should be defined now, which will be the ID that actually resolves to a post inside of GraphCMS and not the Gatsby ID that has been built for us from the source plugin. So what that does is it actually what the source plugin does, it actually generates a new ID field and prefixes it with the type, but also makes the remote ID available as well. So just wait for this to rebuild. So in the meantime, so if we look now inside of our page object that I've logged out, we have a remote ID. You can see what I mean there. It's prefixed with post, but it's identical. So this is the one that will actually resolve to an entry in GraphCMS. This one won't, so it'll just error. So let's rejig our query again. Let's add back what I took out. And then what we want to say is we want to say filter with where post ID is equal to our ID variable. And then inside of our actual use query hook, we pass our objects and then we say variables. We've got ID is page remote ID. So what should happen now, because I've actually passed that variable, that ID variable, which resolves to a GraphCMS post, that is now being passed to our Apollo query. That's been passed to GraphCMS and saying, actually, I only want these comments that have that relationship with this post. So let me just refresh. Again, it's erroring. I thought I tripped that up. What is that error? What is that error? Let me think. It's expected $, found name ID. Let's just look at the Apollo docs again, just so I'm... Oh, you idiot. Of course, missing the $sign for the variable declaration, the definition. Whew. This time should definitely work. Alright, nice. So this isn't a good example because this post has 0 comments. So does that one. This one does. This one has 1 comment. So as you can see, that query is rerunning on each page because we're logging it out here. So it reruns on each page load. It's going to fetch the latest comments, or well, what will actually happen is when I'm reloading this page, it's going to read from the Apollo cache that we set up. But anyway, we've got some data now. So what we should just quickly do, just before we wrap this up, because we're coming up to an hour now, we're just going to quickly kind of list out these comments on the page, as you can see what's kind of going on. So let's just write some quick React stuff. What's going on with this div, article, header, div. So we want to make sure that we put this beneath our content and not inside of the kind of, not in this sidebar. We want it beneath this main column. So that's inside of here. So what I'm going to do is just create a div, and then we'll say, I don't really like that we just name those loading, so we're going to be a bit more specific with those comments loading. Data will be comments. Although actually no, because I will be destructuring comments from that. And then we'll say comments error. So those are now more specific constants for us to work with inside of our template. So rather than just a generic loading, we actually now know what is loading. It's the comment. Inside of here, we'll do comments loading post comments. Wrap that in a P. And we of course need one for comments error. And then of course, if data comments comments.map comment, we actually need to add ID to this. I don't want to use the index as the key for this map, so we want the ID for that comment. What we're going to do is actually, let's just rejig this whole thing. Let me start again. Where are we at? Got lost in quickly adding some rough markup here just so we can get the comments on the page and they actually look presentable. Alright, after this, close that off, and we'll say no. Nice. So what you'll see is we'll actually get this kind of quick flash of loading whilst Apollo is running our query and returning our data from GraphCMS. Very fast though. It's probably reading from the cache. But yeah, so we'll kind of navigate through these pages. There's Jamie's comment that I added. We'll get to a post that probably doesn't have any comments, so we haven't added a state for that. So essentially we need to see if data comments exists. If not, we're just going to say no comments yet. And obviously, normally you would. Actually, that's wrong because data comments. We need to check the length of that, right? So we data comments dot length. Yeah, so there's no comments yet. Because data.comments will always exist once that query is resolved. Data.comments will exist. However, it might be an empty array, or we'll have an array with actual comments in. So we need to check the length, and if the length, essentially this is saying, is there anything in this is there anything in this array? And in this case there isn't, so we're going to just say there's no comments. That's kind of like a boolean to check the size of an array. So yeah, no comments yet. No comments yet. Oh, maybe I broke it. Oh no, there you go. There's a comment. Great. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with what we've got there. I think what would be cool is if we could build this out. Like we could use Gravatar to maybe add a user image for their face based on their email address. Style up this a bit. Obviously, like I said, it's actually marked down, so we could put links in and all sorts in those comments. So we could make this a lot prettier. And what we'll probably do is we'll probably actually do that on the next stream. Maybe sometime next week I'll actually style out this comment section. Maybe this is something that we actually add to the starter. So this was on my fork. Maybe this is something we add to the starter. Let me know what you think in the comments. But I definitely want to add a nicer UI for this. And I also want to add an actual comment form so people can just submit comments on the page using the GraphCMS mutations APIs. With, of course, using Apollo. So that would be really nice. We'll do that in a future stream. But thanks for watching today. Hope you've enjoyed this. Hope you've learned something. If not, you can get at me on Twitter. I will share this code as well. It'll be on GitHub. So yeah, any questions or comments or anything, please get at me on Twitter. Otherwise, have a great Friday and have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for watching. Until next time, see you later.